Across the galaxy, there exists a truth that every alien species whispers in their darkest corners: humans are impossible. They should not exist. They should not survive. They should not thrive in conditions that would kill any rational being. Yet here they are, spreading across the stars like wildfire, turning barren worlds into gardens, making friends with species that should be their natural enemies, and, somehow, impossibly, making the galaxy a better place simply by refusing to give up. But, what happens when humanity's greatest strength becomes entangled with alien royalty? When a queen's lost daughter returns home carrying the impossible children who are half human, half divine alien royalty? What happens when the galaxy discovers that humans don't just survive the impossible, they make it beautiful? This is the story of Princess Zaratiel, who fled her mother's empire 20 years ago and returns with 2 children whose very existence could either unite the galaxy or tear it apart. This is the story of how humanity's stubborn refusal to accept limitations changed the fate of an entire galactic empire. This is the story of what happens when love conquers not just death, but the fundamental laws of biology itself. The Zeltar Imperial Palace stretched across 3 moons, its crystalline spires catching the light of the binary suns and casting rainbow shadows across the void. For 800 years, it had stood as the crown jewel of the galactic hegemony, home to the most powerful ruling dynasty in known space. Today, it trembled. Queen Velrana the Eternal stood in her throne room, her forearms pressed against the viewing wall, watching the approaching vessel. The ship was small, barely larger than a transport shuttle, and bore no imperial markings. But the quantum signature was unmistakable. After 20 years of silence, her daughter was coming home. "Your Majesty," Chancellor Krixtal spoke from behind her, his voice carefully neutral. "The ship will dock in 17 minutes. Shall I prepare the ceremonial guard?" Velrana's secondary arms clenched into fists. Her daughter had fled in shame 20 years ago, after the disaster on the human colony world of New Terra. The war that followed had cost millions of lives and nearly destroyed the hegemony's relationship with the human alliance. Now she was returning, and the quantum sensors were detecting something impossible aboard her ship. "No ceremony," Velrana said finally. "Escort her directly to the private chambers." "And Krixtal?" She turned, her luminescent skin shifting from blue to deep purple with emotion. "Ensure that no one else learns of her arrival." "Not yet." As the Queen's heir, Princess Zaratiel had been genetically perfected, enhanced beyond even normal Zeltar capabilities. She could live for millennia, her body could adapt to any environment, and her mind could process information faster than the most advanced computers. She was designed to be the perfect ruler for a galactic empire. She was also designed to be completely, utterly alone. Zeltar genetics were precise, controlled, and incompatible with other species. For 8 centuries, the royal bloodline had remained pure, untainted by lesser genetic material. This purity was their strength, their right to rule, and their curse. No Zeltar had ever successfully reproduced with another species. The genetic barriers were absolute. Which was why the quantum signatures coming from her daughter's ship were impossible. 20 years ago, Zaratiel had been stationed on New Terra as part of a cultural exchange program with the humans. The mission had gone catastrophically wrong when human colonists had discovered what they believed to be hegemony weapons being secretly deployed on their world. In the chaos that followed, hundreds of humans had died, diplomatic relations had shattered, and Zaratiel had simply vanished. The official report stated that she had died in the fighting. Velrana had allowed this fiction to stand rather than admit that her perfect heir had simply run away. But Mother's intuition and quantum-entangled genetic markers had told her the truth. Zaratiel was alive, somewhere in human space, probably living in exile. Now she was back, and she wasn't alone. The small craft docked with barely a whisper against the vast Imperial station. Velrana made her way through corridors that could have housed entire cities, past guards who snapped to attention without meeting her eyes. Her personal chambers occupied an entire section of the palace, rooms filled with artifacts from 1,000 conquered worlds and art pieces that had taken centuries to create. She waited in her private garden, among plants that bloomed with captured starlight and trees whose leaves sang in harmonies that could drive lesser species to madness. The artificial gravity here was set to New Terra standard, a detail that she now realized might not have been coincidence. The door chimed softly, and Chancellor Krixtal entered. "Your Majesty, Princess Zaratiel requests an audience." "Send her in." Velrana had prepared herself for many things. She had prepared to see her daughter aged by hardship, perhaps scarred by whatever life she had lived among the humans. She had prepared for anger, for defiance, for the possibility that 20 years of exile had broken her perfect heir's spirit. She had not prepared for joy. Zaratiel entered the garden with a smile that lit up her luminescent features, her skin glowing with the warm golden hue that indicated complete happiness. She moved with the same fluid grace she had possessed as a youth, but there was something new in her bearing now. Confidence, perhaps, or simple contentment. "Mother," she said, and her voice carried harmonics that Velrana had never heard before. Rich, complex, layered with emotions that seemed to resonate in frequencies beyond normal Zeltar vocal range. "My daughter." Velrana kept her own voice carefully controlled. "You look, well." "I am well. Better than I have ever been." Zaratiel moved closer, and Velrana could see that her daughter's modifications had continued to develop over the years. Her skin held subtle patterns that shifted like living art, and her eyes had gained depths that seemed to hold captured stars. "You have been living among the humans." "Yes. The sensors detected unusual quantum signatures aboard your vessel." Zaratiel's smile widened. "Mother, there are some people I would like you to meet." Before Velrana could respond, the garden door opened again. Two small figures entered, walking with the careful dignity of children who had been coached in proper behavior but were trying very hard not to stare at everything around them. Velrana's 4 hearts stopped beating. The children were clearly Zeltar, with the telltale luminescent skin and graceful proportions of her people. But they were also clearly something else. Their skin patterns were more complex than any she had ever seen, shifting through colors that included hues impossible for pure Zeltar genetics. Their eyes held depths that spoke of hybrid vigor, and they moved with an energy that seemed to dance between species characteristics. The boy appeared to be about 8 years old, with skin that shifted between silver and blue, and eyes that held flecks of brown and green impossible in Zeltar genetics. The girl was perhaps 6, her coloring more golden, and, when she smiled, her teeth were perfectly human. "Mother," Zaratiel said, her voice now carrying overtones of pride and love, "I would like you to meet your grandchildren. This is Marcus, and this is Luna." The children stepped forward and performed perfect Zeltar court bows, a gesture that should have looked ridiculous on such small figures but instead seemed entirely natural. "Grandmother," Marcus said, his voice carrying the crystal harmonics of their people but with an underlying warmth that was purely human. "Mother has told us many stories about you." Luna bounced slightly on her toes, barely containing her excitement. "She said you rule over 1,000 worlds and that your palace is bigger than entire planets and that you have a garden where the plants sing." Velrana stared at them, her mind reeling. The children existed. Hybrid children, born of Zeltar and human genetics, walking and talking and calling her grandmother. Every law of biology she understood said they should be impossible. "How?" she whispered. Zaratiel reached out and took her mother's hands, and Velrana could feel the changes in her daughter's biology even through that simple touch. Her genetic structure had been altered, adapted, evolved in ways that their science claimed were impossible. "Love, mother," Zaratiel said simply. "And humans have a saying, where there's a will, there's a way. I found both." Over the next hour, as they sat in the singing garden while her impossible grandchildren played among flowers that bloomed with captured starlight, Zaratiel told her story. She had not died in the fighting on New Terra. She had been injured, badly enough that her enhanced healing couldn't cope, and had been taken to a human medical facility. There, a human doctor named David Chen had saved her life using techniques that no Zeltar physician would have attempted. "He was brilliant," Zaratiel said, watching Luna attempt to harmonize with a particularly musical flowering vine. "Not just medically, but in ways our people don't understand. Humans don't see barriers the same way we do. Where we see impossible, they see not yet figured out." Velrana watched Marcus, who had apparently inherited his grandmother's affinity for plants and was coaxing a reluctant bloom to open by humming to it in perfect pitch. "You fell in love with him." "I did. And he loved me back," which our scientists said was impossible because our pheromone signatures shouldn't be compatible. David's response was to study our biochemistry until he found a way to make it work. Zaratiel's skin shimmered with happiness. He said that love was too important to let biology get in the way. The children, Velrana learned, had been conceived through a process that combined human medical innovation with Zeltar genetic technology in ways that neither species had thought to attempt. It had required Zaratiel to undergo modifications that fundamentally altered her biology, changes that should have killed her but, instead had made her stronger, more adaptable, more alive than she had ever been. "And, Dr. Chen?" Velrana asked, though she could read the answer in her daughter's shifted coloring. "He died 3 years ago," Zaratiel said quietly. "A transport accident. But, before he died, he made me promise that I would bring the children here, to meet you, to understand both sides of their heritage." Marcus looked up from the plant he had been coaxing into bloom. "Father said that understanding different ways of thinking makes you smarter. And that the best solutions come from combining ideas that seem opposite." Luna nodded solemnly. "He said that mother's people think in long times and big pictures, and human people think in short times and personal feelings, and that we get to think in both ways." Velrana felt something she hadn't experienced in centuries: uncertainty. These children represented everything that went against hegemony doctrine. Genetic mixing weakened bloodlines, humans were too chaotic to be trusted with real responsibility, and hybrid offspring would be unstable both mentally and physically. Yet here they stood, clearly healthy, obviously intelligent, and radiating a kind of life force that made even her ancient garden seem more vibrant. "Why now?" she asked her daughter. "Why return after 20 years? Zaratiel's expression grew serious, her skin shifting to deeper hues that indicated concern. "Because something is coming, Mother. David's research didn't just solve our compatibility problem. He discovered things about Zeltar genetics that even our own scientists don't understand. We're not as perfect as we think we are." She gestured to the children, who had now found a grove of musical trees and were conducting an impromptu concert. "Marcus and Luna aren't just hybrids, Mother. They're evolved. Their genetics are more stable than pure Zeltar, more adaptable than pure human. David believed that our people have been slowly dying for centuries, becoming more and more isolated until we're beautiful, perfect, and ultimately sterile." Velrana felt a chill that had nothing to do with the garden's controlled climate. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the future of our people might depend on embracing what we've always rejected. The chaos, the adaptability, the sheer stubborn refusal to accept limitations that makes humans so impossible to predict." Zaratiel stood and walked to her children, placing her hands on their shoulders. "I'm saying that Marcus and Luna might be the key to saving not just the Zeltar, but the entire hegemony." As if summoned by her words, Chancellor Krixtal appeared at the garden entrance, his usually controlled demeanor showing cracks of urgent concern. "Your Majesty," he said, bowing deeply, "forgive the intrusion, but we have received urgent communications from the Outer Rim. The Devourers have been sighted in the Proxima sector. They're heading this way, and our projections suggest they'll reach the core worlds within 6 months." Velrana felt her blood turn to ice. The Devourers were an ancient enemy, a species that consumed entire worlds and left nothing but empty space behind. They appeared every few millennia, and, each time, they grew stronger while the galaxy's defenses grew weaker. "How many ships?" she asked. "Thousands, Your Majesty. Possibly tens of thousands. More than we faced in any previous incursion." Zaratiel stepped forward, her children moving to flank her with unconscious precision. "Mother, this is why I came back. David's research wasn't just about genetics. He was studying ancient records, trying to understand why certain species survived devourer attacks while others didn't. His conclusions were disturbing." She paused, looking at her impossible children, then back at her mother. "The Devourers don't just consume randomly. They target genetic stagnation. They're not destroyers, Mother. They're an immune system, designed to eliminate species that have stopped evolving. The garden fell silent except for the singing of the trees, a harmony that now sounded ominous rather than beautiful. "And our people?" Valrana asked, though she already knew the answer. "Have been genetically static for nearly 1,000 years, Zaratiel confirmed. Perfect, unchanging, and exactly the kind of target the Devourers are designed to eliminate." Marcus looked up at his grandmother, his hybrid eyes serious beyond his years. "But we're not static, grandmother. We're new." Luna nodded earnestly. "Father said that when things stop growing, they start dying. But, when different things combine, they make something stronger." Valrana stared at her grandchildren, her perfect genetics, her dying empire, and the approaching darkness that threatened to consume everything she had spent centuries building. The solution her daughter proposed went against everything she had been taught, every tradition that had kept the Zeltar strong and pure. But, as she watched Marcus coax impossible music from alien flowers while Luna giggled at a harmony that shouldn't exist, she began to understand what David Chen had seen. Sometimes the impossible was just another word for not tried yet. The fate of the galaxy might rest in the hands of two children who should never have existed, born from a love that should have been impossible, carrying the combined strengths of two species that had always considered themselves incompatible. In the distance, emergency signals began to sound as news of the Devourer approach spread through the palace. The greatest test in hegemony history was beginning, and, at its center stood a human-raised alien princess with her impossible children, offering evolution as the price of survival. Valrana looked at her daughter, then, at her grandchildren, and, finally, at the galaxy beyond her crystal walls. For the first time in 8 centuries, the future was completely uncertain. And, perhaps, she thought as Marcus began teaching Luna to sing to the stars, that was exactly what they needed. The War Council chamber existed in a space between dimensions, its walls displaying real-time tactical data from across the galaxy. Representatives from 47 different species materialized as holograms around the massive crystalline table, their forms flickering as quantum communication relays struggled to maintain coherent signals across interstellar distances. Valrana materialized at the head of the table, her form rendered in perfect detail despite being projected from the Zeltar homeworld 3 sectors away. Around her, the greatest military minds in the galaxy appeared one by one: Admiral Fexnor of the Crystalline Empire, General Ulara from the Hive Worlds, Commander Sarah Mitchell representing the Human Alliance. "The situation is worse than our initial reports suggested," Admiral Fexnor began without preamble. His crystal-based form chimed with harmonics that indicated extreme stress. "Our scouts in the Proxima sector have confirmed that this Devourer fleet is unlike anything in recorded history. They're not just larger in number, they're evolved." The tactical display shifted, showing massive bioships that dwarfed anything in the galactic fleet. The Devourers had always been organic technology, but these ships showed levels of complexity that defied easy categorization. They moved like living creatures, responded to threats with animal cunning, and seemed to learn from each encounter. "How many?" Commander Mitchell asked. Her image was sharp and clear, the human projection technology being remarkably stable despite the distance. "Conservative estimates put their numbers at 50,000 capital-class vessels," General Ulara reported. The Hive representatives' multiple voices spoke in perfect unison, each one capable of consuming an entire world's biomass within days. Valrana felt the collective weight of despair settling over the council. In their greatest previous victory against the Devourers, 800 years ago, they had faced perhaps 5,000 ships and barely survived. Now they faced 10 times that number with fleets that had been weakened by centuries of internal conflicts and resource depletion. "There is another factor we must consider," she said, her voice cutting through the growing panic. "Recent intelligence suggests that the Devourers may not be merely destructive. They may be selective in their targeting." The council fell silent. Admiral Fexnor's crystal form stopped chiming entirely. "Explain," Commander Mitchell demanded. Valrana had spent the 3 days since Zaratiel's return reviewing every piece of data her daughter had brought back. David Chen's research had been exhaustive, covering not just genetics but historical patterns, archaeological evidence, and theoretical xenobiology that pushed the boundaries of current understanding. Dr. David Chen of the Human Alliance compiled extensive research on Devourer attack patterns, she began. His analysis suggests that they target species that have reached genetic stagnation. Species that have stopped evolving, stopped adapting, stopped growing.
That's impossible, Admiral Fexnor chimed. The devourers consume everything in their path. They don't discriminate. Don't they?
Valrana activated a section of the tactical display, showing historical data that spanned millennia.
The Vordani Empire. Genetically pure for 2,000 years. Completely consumed.
The Eternal Republic of Klextar. Unchanged for 15 centuries.
Entirely devoured. The perfect harmonies of Velthan. Static for a millennium. Not a single survivor.
She shifted the display to show different data.
The chaotic tribes of Rix and Al. Constantly evolving through ritual genetic mixing.
Attacked, but survivors found refuge in the outer systems. The shapeshifter clans of Nixera.
Perpetually adapting. Sustained casualties, but ultimately endured. The Human Alliance.
Commander Mitchell leaned forward.
What about us? Attacked 17 times over the past 3 millennia. Never fully consumed.
Always managing to find some new adaptation, some unexpected strategy, some impossible solution that allows survival. The Council digested this information in uncomfortable silence. If Chen's theory was correct, then, the greatest civilizations in the galaxy, those that prided themselves on perfection, stability, and genetic purity, were also the most vulnerable to extinction. The Zeltar hegemony, Admiral Fexnor said quietly, has maintained genetic purity for 8 centuries. As has the Crystalline Empire, General Ulara added. Our forms have been perfected for over a millennium.
Which means, Valrana continued, that traditional military response may not be sufficient.
We may need to consider alternative approaches. Before anyone could respond, alerts began flashing across the tactical display. A priority communication was coming through from the palace. Mother, Zaratiel's voice cut through the council chamber's silence.
You need to see this.
Marcus and Luna have made a discovery. The council members exchanged glances of confusion. The idea that children could contribute anything meaningful to galactic strategy seemed absurd. But Valrana had learned over the past 3 days that her grandchildren operated by entirely different rules than anything she understood.
Patch them through, she commanded. New holographic displays materialized, showing the palace's main analytical laboratory.
Zaratiel stood at the center, but it was Marcus and Luna who commanded attention. The 8-year-old boy was interfacing with quantum computers in ways that should have required decades of training, his hybrid biology apparently allowing him to process information at speeds that impressed even Zeltar technicians. 6-year-old Luna sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by what appeared to be toys but were actually sophisticated modeling systems that she manipulated with intuitive precision. Show them what you found, Zaratiel encouraged. Marcus looked up from his computations, his hybrid eyes focusing on the council members with unsettling intelligence.
The Devourers aren't evil, he said simply. They're trying to save the galaxy. Stunned silence followed this pronouncement.
Explain, Commander Mitchell said, her voice gentle but firm.
Luna bounced to her feet, clutching a toy that was actually a complex mathematical model of galactic evolution.
Uncle David's notes said that growing things stay healthy, but things that stop growing get sick and die. The big hungry ships, they eat the sick parts so the healthy parts can keep growing.
Marcus nodded seriously. Look.
He manipulated the quantum display, showing a 3-dimensional model of galactic civilization over the past 10 millennia. Every time the Devourers come, they eliminate species that have reached what Uncle David called evolutionary terminus. But they leave behind the species that are still changing, still growing. The model showed the pattern clearly: static civilizations consumed entirely, adaptive civilizations surviving to fill the vacant ecological niches.
The Devourers aren't destroyers, Zaratiel explained. They're gardeners.
They prune away the dead branches so the tree can continue to grow.
Admiral Fexnor's crystal form began resonating with what sounded like distress. Are you suggesting that we deserve to be eliminated?
No, Marcus said firmly, displaying wisdom far beyond his years.
We're suggesting that you need to start growing again. Luna nodded enthusiastically. Like Mother did. She was all perfect and couldn't change, but then she learned human ways and became more perfect. The tactical display shifted to show the children's analysis of Zaratiel's genetic evolution. Her modifications hadn't weakened her Zeltar heritage, they had enhanced it, adding capabilities and resilience that pure genetics couldn't achieve. The human approach to impossible problems, Commander Mitchell said thoughtfully, has always been to make them possible through innovation and adaptation. Exactly, Zaratiel confirmed. And Marcus and Luna represent proof that such adaptation works. But, more than that, they've identified something that even David didn't fully realize.
She gestured to Marcus, who called up new data that made several council members gasp in surprise. The Devourers are showing signs of genetic stagnation themselves, Marcus explained. They've been using the same basic ship designs, the same consumption patterns, the same tactical approaches for thousands of years.
They're becoming what they hunt. Luna giggled. The gardeners forgot to plant new seeds in their own garden. The implications hit the council like a quantum shockwave.
If the Devourers themselves had become genetically static, then they were vulnerable to their own elimination protocol. But that also meant this might be their final attempt to cleanse the galaxy before they too faced extinction.
What are you proposing? General Yulara asked.
Zaratiel looked at her children, who were already working on new calculations with the kind of enthusiasm that only children could bring to saving the galaxy.
A grand experiment, she said.
Instead of fighting the Devourers with traditional military might, we adapt. We evolve. We become something they can't consume because we're changing too fast for their targeting protocols to lock onto.
Marcus looked up from his computations. Human Daddy always said that the best defense against being eaten is to become indigestible.
The Human Alliance has always been masters of rapid adaptation, Commander Mitchell said slowly. But the timescale we're discussing, weeks, perhaps months, that's beyond even human capabilities. Not if we work together, Luna announced, manipulating her mathematical toys with startling precision.
Look.
If crystalline people share their long-time thinking with hive people's many-mind thinking, and if perfect people share their strong body knowledge with human people's clever problem-solving, and if everyone shares with everyone. Her toy model showed something that took the Council's collective breath away, a mathematical representation of accelerated evolution that could theoretically allow entire species to adapt in real time. Symbiosis, Admiral Fexnor whispered, his crystal form beginning to resonate with what might have been hope. Not just genetic mixing, but technological, cultural, and biological integration on a scale never attempted.
The risks would be enormous, General Yulara pointed out. Cultural contamination, genetic instability, loss of species identity.
The risk of extinction is greater, Valrana said firmly. She had watched her impossible grandchildren work for 3 days, seen them solve problems that stumped the galaxy's greatest minds, and witnessed them do it all while laughing and playing games. My grandchildren exist as proof that such integration not only works but creates something stronger than the sum of its parts. Commander Mitchell leaned back in her chair, her expression thoughtful.
The Human Alliance has been developing rapid genetic adaptation protocols for extreme environment colonization. If we shared that technology, the Crystalline Empire has memory storage techniques that could preserve cultural identity during biological modification, Admiral Fexnor added, his chiming taking on harmonious notes of possibility. The hive worlds possess collective consciousness networks that could coordinate integration across multiple species simultaneously, General Yulara contributed. Marcus and Luna exchanged glances, then grinned with the kind of joy that only children could feel when adults finally understood their game. It's not just sharing, Marcus explained. It's becoming family.
Over the next several hours, as the Devourer fleet continued its inexorable advance toward the core worlds, the greatest military minds in the galaxy found themselves planning not a war, but a metamorphosis. The children's calculations showed that with sufficient cooperation, entire planets could undergo guided evolution in weeks rather than millennia. The plan that emerged was audacious beyond anything ever attempted, a galaxy-wide genetic and cultural exchange program that would transform every participating species into hybrid forms capable of continuing evolution in real time. Humans would gain the longevity and environmental adaptation of other species. Zeltar would gain the innovative flexibility and emotional resonance of humanity. Crystalline forms would gain biological adaptability while maintaining their memory crystallization abilities. The logistics alone would be staggering, Admiral Fexnor observed. Moving entire populations, coordinating genetic modification on a galactic scale, maintaining communication across thousands of worlds. Human Daddy had a saying, Luna announced cheerfully. He said that the only way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. We don't start with entire populations, Zaratiel explained. We start with volunteers. Individuals from each species who are willing to undergo the integration process. They become seeds, examples, proof that it works. Then, we expand from there. Marcus had been working on new calculations while the adults talked, and now he looked up with excitement. Grandmother! I found something amazing. The math says that if even 10% of the galaxy's population undergoes integration, the evolutionary momentum becomes self-sustaining. The devourers won't be able to identify targets because nothing will stay static long enough for their elimination protocols to lock on. Velrana felt something she hadn't experienced since she was young, the thrill of possibility without limits. Her grandchildren had shown her that the impossible was simply another word for unexplored, and that the greatest strength of any civilization was not its perfection but its ability to grow beyond what it had been. The question, Commander Mitchell said, is whether we can implement this plan fast enough. The Devourer fleet will reach the outer colonies in 4 months. Luna giggled and pointed at her mathematical toy, which was showing probability cascades that resembled fireworks. Human people are really good at doing impossible things when they're scared and have friends to help. The council session ended with the most unlikely war plan in galactic history. Instead of preparing for battle, 47 different species would attempt to evolve themselves out of existence and into something entirely new. The success of the plan would depend on the willingness of billions of individuals to abandon everything they had been in order to become something they had never imagined. As the council members began disconnecting to return to their home worlds with news that would shock their governments, Velrana remained connected to watch her grandchildren. Marcus was already designing integration protocols with the casual confidence of someone who had never learned that certain things were impossible. Luna was building mathematical models of galactic harmony with the joy of a child creating art. For the first time in centuries, the future was completely uncertain. And, as Velrana watched her hybrid grandchildren work to save a galaxy that had once considered them impossible, she realized that uncertainty might be the most beautiful thing in the universe. 3 weeks after the galaxy learned that evolution was its only hope of survival, the integration station above Earth hummed with activity that defied every law of physics, biology, and common sense. The massive orbital platform had been constructed in a record-breaking 10 days through the combined efforts of 47 different species, each contributing their most advanced technologies to create something that had never existed before, a facility designed to safely merge the fundamental essence of different life forms. Dr. Elena Vasquez floated in the station's central laboratory, her human form already showing the early stages of Zeltar integration. Her skin had gained a subtle luminescence that shifted with her emotions, and her enhanced senses could perceive electromagnetic spectra that pure humans couldn't even imagine. She was one of the first volunteers, and her successful transformation had convinced thousands of others to take the leap into biological uncertainty. Integration Chamber 7 reporting successful crystalline human hybrid stabilization, her voice carried across the station's quantum communication network with harmonics that no baseline human throat could produce. Subject is maintaining consciousness and retaining full memory integration. Around her, dozens of other volunteers underwent their own transformations. In Chamber 3, a Zeltar warrior named Kethvar was learning to access human emotional resonance while keeping his species' legendary longevity. In Chamber 12, a crystalline empire engineer was growing organic neural pathways that allowed her to interface with biological systems while maintaining her natural ability to store entire libraries in crystalline memory matrices. The process was not without risks. 2 volunteers had already been lost to genetic incompatibility, their bodies unable to reconcile the fundamental differences between species. But, for every failure, there were 5 successes, and each success taught them more about how to make the process safer and more effective. Marcus and Luna moved through the station like tiny professors, their hybrid genetics allowing them to understand integration processes that baffled even the most experienced xenobiologists. They seemed to instinctively grasp which combinations would work and which would prove fatal, guiding the adult scientists with the casual confidence of children who had never learned that certain knowledge was supposed to be impossible. "Dr. Vasquez," Luna called out, floating over to the observation window with the grace of someone who had grown up in variable gravity.
"Can you show Marcus the new memory sharing thing? He wants to understand how crystalline thinking works."
Elena smiled, the expression causing her partially integrated skin to shimmer with golden light. Over the past weeks, she had discovered that Zeltar emotional expression was far more complex and beautiful than anything humans had developed.
"Of course, little one."
"Marcus, place your hand on the interface panel." The 8-year-old boy pressed his palm against a surface that looked like liquid crystal but felt warm and alive. Elena activated her newly integrated memory crystallization ability, sharing with him the experience of her transformation from baseline human to hybrid form. Marcus's eyes widened as he experienced her memories not just as visual information, but as complete sensory and emotional experiences. He felt what it was like to have his consciousness expanded beyond human limitations while maintaining the creative spontaneity that made humans so adaptable. "Wow," he whispered, his voice carrying new harmonics.
"It's like learning to see colors that don't have names yet."
"Exactly," Elena confirmed.
"And that's why the integration program is working. We're not just combining different species, we're creating entirely new ways of experiencing the universe."
Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out on hundreds of worlds. The hive worlds had converted entire asteroids into integration facilities where individuals could safely undergo collective consciousness expansion while maintaining personal identity. The Crystalline Empire had opened their most sacred memory vaults, allowing other species to access thousands of years of accumulated knowledge in exchange for learning human innovation techniques.
Even more remarkably, the process was accelerating.
Early integrations had taken weeks and required massive technological support. But, as each new hybrid came online, they brought with them intuitive understanding that made subsequent integrations faster, safer, and more successful.
"It's like the galaxy is learning how to evolve," Luna announced during her daily briefing to the Integration Council.
At 6 years old, she had somehow become one of the primary coordinators for the entire program, her mathematical models of biological harmony proving more accurate than anything the adults could devise.
The council itself had changed dramatically.
Queen Velrana now appeared with skin that shifted through colors impossible for pure Zeltar genetics, her integration with human emotional range having enhanced rather than diminished her royal bearing. Commander Sarah Mitchell had gained the longevity and environmental adaptability of several species, allowing her to coordinate military efforts across timeframes that would have exhausted baseline humans. Admiral Fexnor had grown organic neural networks that let him process intuitive leaps alongside his species' traditional logical progression. Current integration statistics, Luna reported, consulting mathematical models that looked like toys but contain more computational power than most planetary databases. Approximately 2 million volunteers across all species have completed successful integration.
Another 10 million are in various stages of the process.
And the really exciting part is that the integrated populations are already showing signs of accelerated evolution. She manipulated her data models with the enthusiasm of a child playing with building blocks, showing how hybrid populations were developing new capabilities almost daily. Integrated humans were gaining telepathic abilities through their connections to hive consciousness networks. Zeltar hybrids were learning to modify their bodies in real time to adapt to changing environments. Crystalline hybrids were developing organic creativity that allowed them to invent technologies that pure logical analysis could never have conceived. More importantly, Marcus added from his position at a quantum computation array that he operated like a musical instrument. The Devourers are starting to notice. The tactical display shifted to show the approaching fleet, still months away from the core worlds but clearly altering their advance pattern. The bioships that had moved with predictable precision for millennia were now displaying what could only be described as confusion. Their targeting systems are based on identifying genetic stagnation, Zaratiel explained to the council. Her own integration had continued to evolve, and she now served as the primary liaison between human innovation and Zeltar long-term planning. But we're changing so fast that their elimination protocols can't get a lock on us. It's like trying to shoot at a soap bubble while riding a roller coaster, Luna giggled. Everything keeps moving and changing and being slippery. The comparison was more accurate than it seemed. The Devourer fleet had begun displaying what their monitoring stations interpreted as frustration. Bioships were breaking formation, testing different approach vectors, and, in some cases, actually backing away from systems where integration activity was particularly intense. "We're receiving communication attempts," Admiral Fexnor reported, his crystal form now interwoven with organic fibers that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns. "The Devourers are trying to establish contact." This was unprecedented. In all recorded history, the Devourers had never attempted communication with their intended targets. They simply arrived, consumed what they identified as evolutionarily stagnant, and departed to allow the remaining species to expand into vacant ecological niches. "Put them through," Velrana commanded. The communication that came through was unlike anything they had ever received. Instead of words or images, it was pure concept transfer, mathematical representations of biological purpose that spoke directly to the hybrid consciousness that the integrated individuals had developed. The message was simple and profound: confusion, curiosity, and something that could only be interpreted as hope. Marcus translated for those who couldn't process the conceptual communication directly. "They're asking what we've become. They don't understand how we can be changing so fast. And they want to know if..." He paused, his young face scrunching with concentration as he processed concepts that had no equivalent in normal language. "They want to know if we can teach them how to grow again too." The revelation hit the council like a quantum shockwave. The Devourers weren't just confused by what the galaxy was becoming, they were envious of it. After millions of years of serving as galactic gardeners, they had become exactly what they hunted: evolutionarily static, trapped in patterns that no longer served their original purpose. "They're dying," Luna said softly, her mathematical models now showing projections that made several council members weep. "They've been the same for so long that they've forgotten how to change. And, without change, they're getting sick inside." The bioships visible on the tactical display suddenly took on a different character. What had appeared to be menacing organic architecture now looked like the shells of creatures that had grown too large and rigid for the life force contained within them. The Devourers hadn't become more evolved, they had become trapped by their own perfection. "Can we help them?" Commander Mitchell asked, her enhanced human empathy resonating with Zeltar emotional depth and crystalline logical analysis in ways that created entirely new forms of compassion. Marcus and Luna exchanged glances, then turned to their computational systems with the determined enthusiasm of children who had been given permission to attempt the impossible. "Maybe," Marcus said, his fingers dancing across quantum interfaces while his hybrid mind processed biological mathematics at speeds that made the station's computers seem sluggish. "If integration works between different galactic species, it might work for them too. But they're really, really big," Luna finished, gesturing at tactical displays that showed bioships the size of small moons. "And they've been static for millions of years. It would be like trying to teach a mountain how to dance." Zaratiel moved to stand behind her children, her own integration having taught her that the impossible was simply another word for requires a creative approach. David used to say that the size of a problem just meant you needed a bigger solution. Over the next several hours, as the Devourer fleet continued its confused approach toward the core worlds, the greatest minds in the galaxy attempted to design an integration process that could work on a scale never before contemplated. They would need to find a way to safely modify biological entities that were millions of years old, larger than cities, and operating on quantum biological principles that pushed the boundaries of known science. The solution, when it came from Luna's mathematical toys. "Look," she announced, floating upside down in the laboratory's variable gravity field while manipulating models that sparkled with impossible mathematics. "You don't try to change the whole mountain at once. You start with just a tiny little piece, and then that piece teaches the next piece, and the next piece teaches the next piece, and pretty soon the whole mountain is dancing." Marcus caught on immediately.
Cascade integration. We integrate with just a few Devourer bioships, creating hybrid consciousness that can then facilitate integration with other ships in their fleet. The concept was terrifying in its scope and beautiful in its simplicity. Instead of trying to modify the entire Devourer fleet from the outside, they would create integration volunteers who could work from within the fleet structure, spreading adaptive evolution through biological networks that spanned entire armadas. The risks, Admiral Fexnor pointed out, would be beyond calculation. Integration with entities that large, that old, that fundamentally different from anything we've ever encountered. Could kill everyone involved, Elena Vasquez finished, her hybrid senses allowing her to perceive the quantum uncertainties surrounding such an attempt. Or create something entirely beyond our current understanding. But, if we don't try, Commander Mitchell said quietly, the Devourers continue their approach, become increasingly frustrated with targets they can't eliminate, and, eventually decide to simply consume everything rather than risk allowing evolutionary stagnation to continue. Velrana looked at her grandchildren, who were already working on integration protocols with the casual confidence of children who had never learned to fear the impossible. Marcus was designing biological interface systems that could safely connect galactic consciousness to million-year-old bioship networks. Luna was calculating probability cascades that showed how successful integration could spread through an entire fleet within weeks. For the first time since becoming queen 800 years ago, Velrana was about to make a decision that would affect not just her empire, not just the galaxy, but the fundamental nature of life itself. We attempt contact, she announced. We offer the Devourers what we've discovered, that growth doesn't end with perfection, it begins with the courage to become something new. The first volunteer integration team assembled within hours. Elena Vasquez would represent human adaptability. Kethvar would bring Zeltar genetic optimization. Admiral Fexnor would contribute crystalline memory integration. A dozen other hybrid volunteers from various species would provide additional capabilities and perspectives. And, guiding them all would be Marcus and Luna, the impossible children whose existence proved that evolution's greatest strength was its refusal to accept limitations. As they prepared for a journey into the biological heart of entities older than recorded history, Luna looked up at her grandmother with the kind of trust that only children could give. "Don't worry, grandmother," she said, her voice carrying harmonics of confidence that resonated across species boundaries. "Daddy always said that the scariest adventures make the best stories. And, we're going to have the most amazing story ever." The integration station began preparing for an experiment that would either save the galaxy or transform it into something entirely beyond current imagination. Either way, as Marcus pointed out while programming bioship interface protocols, it would definitely be interesting. The age of static perfection was ending. The age of endless becoming was about to begin. The bioship Eternal Hunger stretched across 15 kilometers of space, its living hull pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that had remained unchanged for 3 million years. Today, for the first time in eons, those patterns flickered with uncertainty as the integration shuttle approached its docking tendrils. Marcus pressed his small hand against the shuttle's observation window, his hybrid senses allowing him to perceive the bioship's quantum biological field in ways that made even the most advanced sensors seem primitive. "It's scared," he whispered, his 8-year-old voice carrying harmonics of concern that resonated with every adult on the shuttle. Luna floated beside him, her mathematical mind processing the bioship's electromagnetic emissions as if they were equations she could solve. "Not scared," she corrected gently. "Lonely. It's been the same for so long that it forgot how to talk to things that are different." Elena Vasquez checked her integration monitors for the 100th time, her hybrid biology allowing her to interface directly with the shuttle's systems while maintaining human intuition about the approaching encounter. 3 weeks of preparation had brought them to this moment, the first attempt to integrate with a Devourer bioship. "Remember," Zaratiel's voice came through quantum communication from the integration station, "you're not trying to change them. You're offering them the opportunity to remember how to change themselves." The docking process was unlike anything in recorded history. Instead of mechanical connections, the bioship extended tendrils that sought biological compatibility with the shuttle's hybrid crew. Marcus and Luna guided the process, their unique genetics allowing them to serve as living translators between the ancient bioship consciousness and the integrated volunteers.
As the airlock sealed and atmosphere equalized, the team found themselves breathing air that tasted of memories older than civilization. The bioship's interior was less a constructed space than a living organism. They were entering as symbionts rather than passengers. Admiral Fexnor's crystalline organic hybrid form resonated with the ship's biorhythms, his enhanced perception mapping neural pathways that spanned the entire vessel. The consciousness is distributed throughout the ship structure, he reported, his voice carrying undertones of awe. This isn't a ship with a brain, this is a brain that happens to be ship-shaped. Kefar moved with enhanced Zeltar grace through corridors that pulsed with biological activity, his integrated human empathy allowing him to sense the profound melancholy that permeated the ancient vessel. It's not just lonely, he realized. It's grieving. Mourning for something it's lost but can't remember how to find again. Elena led the team deeper into the bioship's core, following Marcus and Luna, who seemed to navigate the organic passages with intuitive understanding. The children moved as if they were walking through a familiar garden rather than exploring an alien entity older than their entire species. Here, Luna announced, stopping in what appeared to be an empty chamber whose walls pulsed with bioluminescent networks. This is where it keeps its memories of being small. The chamber responded to their presence, walls shifting to reveal crystalline matrices that held compressed information in formats that predated current galactic civilization. As the team's hybrid consciousness interfaced with these ancient memory cores, they experienced something unprecedented, the birth memories of entities that had once been as small and curious as any other life form. They weren't always gardeners, Marcus said wonderingly, his young mind processing concepts that span geological timescales. They started out like us, little, growing, learning new things. But they got really good at helping other things grow, and, after millions of years, they forgot how to grow themselves. The memory crystals showed the Devourer's evolution from small, adaptable organisms to their current role as galactic ecosystem managers. But the progression wasn't advancement, it was specialization that had eventually become imprisonment. They had become so perfectly adapted to their function that they had lost the ability to become anything else. Elena felt tears running down her face as she experienced the ancient grief embedded in these memories. They'd been trying to help everyone else evolve while denying themselves the same opportunity. They'd been gardening the galaxy while forgetting they were plants too. The bioship's consciousness began responding to their presence in ways that its builders had never anticipated. Neural pathways that had been dormant for millions of years started firing as the integration volunteers shared their own memories of transformation, growth, and the joy of becoming something new. Suddenly, the chamber filled with harmonics that made the ship's entire structure resonate like a musical instrument. The eternal hunger was singing not the mechanical humming of engines, but the organic melody of a consciousness rediscovering wonder. It wants to learn, Luna giggled, spinning in the chamber's variable gravity as bioluminescent patterns began shifting into configurations that hadn't existed for eons. It wants to remember how to play. The integration process that followed defied every protocol they had developed. Instead of the carefully controlled biological modifications they had used with galactic species, the Devourer bioship integration was more like teaching a mountain to dance. The consciousness was so vast, so ancient, so deeply embedded in its current form that traditional approaches proved impossible. Instead, Marcus and Luna became living bridges between the ship's quantum biological matrix and the integration team's hybrid consciousness. They served as translators not just of language, but of entire ways of experiencing existence. Don't try to change everything at once, Marcus advised the bioship consciousness, his small hand pressed against neural interfaces that responded to his hybrid genetics like flowers turning toward sunlight. Start with just one little piece. Remember what it felt like to be curious about something new. The result was extraordinary. A single neural cluster within the vast bioship began experimenting with variations in its bioluminescent patterns. Instead of the rigid sequences that had remained unchanged for millions of years, it started creating new combinations, new rhythms, new expressions of its emerging personality. From that single cluster, the transformation began spreading. The bioship's consciousness started rediscovering creativity, curiosity, and the profound joy of growth that it had abandoned in favor of perfect static function. But, more than that, it began reaching out to other bioships in the Devourer fleet through quantum biological networks that spanned interstellar distances. The song of rediscovered growth spread from ship to ship, awakening capabilities that had been dormant for geological ages. "They're waking up," Elena reported to the integration station, her voice carrying wonder that made everyone listening feel hope they hadn't known they were capable of experiencing.
"The entire fleet is beginning to remember how to evolve."
Over the following days, as the integration process accelerated beyond anything their models had predicted, the galaxy witnessed something unprecedented. The Devourer fleet began changing its fundamental nature. Bioships that had been identical in design for millions of years started developing unique characteristics, individual personalities, and innovative capabilities that their original creators had never imagined. Some bioships began developing new sensory arrays that allowed them to perceive beauty in cosmic phenomena they had previously ignored. Others grew artistic appendages that created sculptures from interstellar matter. A few even started cultivating gardens within their hulls, growing plants from worlds they had visited rather than simply cataloging them for ecosystem management. But the most remarkable change was their attitude toward other life forms. Instead of viewing themselves as gardeners tending inferior species, the awakened devourers began to see the galaxy's inhabitants as fellow travelers on the path of evolution. "This is working better than our best-case scenarios," Admiral Fexnor reported during a quantum conference with the integration station. His crystalline organic form now interfaced directly with the Eternal Hunger's navigation systems, allowing him to coordinate fleet movements with elegant precision.
"The Devourer fleet isn't just integrating, it's becoming a new form of life entirely."
Luna floated in the bioship's command center, which had transformed from a sterile control room into something resembling a living garden where consciousness and technology grew together in beautiful complexity.
"They want to help everyone integrate now," she announced excitedly.
"They say they wasted millions of years being scared of change, and now they want to make up for lost time."
The implications were staggering.
The Devourer fleet possessed technologies and capabilities that no galactic civilization had ever approached. Their bioships could modify planetary ecosystems, facilitate evolution on massive scales, and transport entire populations across interstellar distances with ease. If they applied these capabilities to supporting integration rather than eliminating stagnation, the galaxy's transformation could accelerate beyond anything previously imagined. Marcus, who had spent the past week learning to interface directly with bioship consciousness, looked up from quantum biological computations that would have challenged entire research teams.
"They want to share everything they know about evolution.
All their knowledge from millions of years of watching things grow and change.
They say it belongs to everyone now." What followed was the greatest information transfer in galactic history.
The awakened devourers began sharing not just their accumulated knowledge of biological processes, but their understanding of how consciousness itself could evolve. They provided integration protocols that made the process safer, faster, and more comprehensive than anything the galactic civilizations had developed independently. Within weeks, integration rates increased by orders of magnitude. Entire worlds underwent guided evolution that transformed not just their biological capabilities, but their understanding of what it meant to be alive. The galaxy was becoming something entirely new, not a collection of separate species competing for resources, but a unified organism composed of infinite diversity working toward shared growth. But perhaps the most beautiful change was in the devourers themselves. The ancient entities that had spent millions of years alone, constrained by their role as galactic gardeners, were rediscovering what it meant to have friends. Elena found herself serving as unofficial translator between the bioship consciousness and the galactic representatives who came to visit.
Watching a 3-million-year-old entity learn to laugh at Luna's jokes was an experience that redefined her understanding of wonder.
"They're not the same beings that started approaching our world 6 months ago," she reported to Queen Velrana during one of their regular updates. "They've become something entirely new, ancient wisdom combined with childlike curiosity, cosmic perspective combined with personal growth." Velrana, whose own integration had continued evolving throughout the crisis, felt something that she realized was unprecedented in her 8th century reign: complete optimism about the future.
"What are their intentions now?" she asked. "Do they still see themselves as gardeners?"
Marcus answered from where he was teaching a bioship consciousness to create poetry by manipulating gravitational fields.
"They say everyone's a gardener now.
And everyone's a flower too. The whole galaxy is going to be one big garden where everything helps everything else grow."
Luna nodded enthusiastically from her position coordinating bioship integration protocols.
And they say they're going to find other galaxies that need help growing too. We're going to teach the whole universe how to dance. As Elena looked around the transformed command center where ancient alien consciousness worked alongside hybrid children to coordinate galactic evolution, she realized that David Shen's greatest discovery hadn't been how to create hybrid genetics. It had been the understanding that love, the determination to help others become the best version of themselves, was the fundamental force driving all evolution. The Devourer crisis was ending not with victory or defeat, but with the recognition that growth never had to end. The galaxy was becoming a place where the impossible was simply another word for not yet attempted, where different species could become family, and where ancient entities could rediscover the joy of learning something new.
The age of static perfection had ended. The age of infinite becoming had begun.
And, at its heart were two impossible children whose existence proved that the best solutions to any problem started with refusing to accept that the problem was unsolvable.
As Marcus put it while programming bioship neural networks to compose symphonies from cosmic radiation, Daddy was right. Love really can make anything possible. Even making mountains dance.
1 year after the Great Integration began, the galaxy was unrecognizable from what it had been. Where once there had been rigid species boundaries and territorial divisions, there now existed a fluid tapestry of conscious beings who shared knowledge, genetics, and experiences across distances that had once seemed impossible to bridge. The Zeltar hegemony still existed, but it was no longer an empire built on genetic purity and rigid hierarchy. It had become a collaborative network where Queen Velrana served as coordinator rather than ruler, helping to guide decisions that affected the well-being of integrated consciousness spanning hundreds of worlds. Velrana stood in what had once been her private garden, but was now a living laboratory where representatives from across the galaxy came to share discoveries and plan new adventures in growth. Her own integration had continued evolving throughout the year, and she now existed as something that transcended her original Zeltar genetics while honoring everything beautiful about what she had been.
Grandmother.
Luna's voice carried across the garden with harmonics that made the musical plants respond with joy. At 7 years old, she had become one of the galaxy's foremost experts on integration mathematics, her hybrid consciousness allowing her to perceive patterns in biological evolution that eluded even the most sophisticated analytical systems. She came running through the garden followed by Marcus, who at 9 had developed the ability to interface directly with quantum biological networks across interstellar distances. Behind them came a parade of beings that would have been impossible to imagine just 1 year before, crystalline human hybrids whose organic neural networks sparkled with stored starlight, hive Zeltar integrations whose collective consciousness maintained individual personality, and Devourer-enhanced beings whose bioship modifications allowed them to survive in the vacuum of space while retaining their original species' cultural identity.
Look what we discovered!
Marcus announced excitedly, gesturing to a newcomer who made Velrana catch her breath in surprise. The being was clearly Devourer in origin, but smaller than any bioship entity they had encountered before. It stood roughly humanoid in shape, with organic technology integrated so seamlessly with biological systems that it was impossible to tell where consciousness ended and ship began. But what truly shocked Velrana was the entity's apparent youth. This was not an ancient consciousness awakened after millions of years of stagnation, but something entirely new.
This is Echo, Luna explained, bouncing with excitement.
She's the first Devourer baby born since integration began.
The bioships figured out how to have children again.
Echo moved with the curiosity of youth combined with the cosmic perspective of her species' ancient wisdom. When she spoke, her voice carried harmonics that seemed to encompass the entire electromagnetic spectrum. Honored Queen Coordinator, Echo said, performing a greeting that combined Devourer biorhythmic pulses with Zeltar court protocol, I bring messages of gratitude from the collective harmony of ancient singers.
Velrana blinked, trying to process this latest development. The collective harmony of ancient singers? Marcus grinned.
That's what the Devourer fleet decided to call themselves now that they remember how to sing. They're exploring the far galaxy, looking for other civilizations that might want to learn about integration.
And they're finding amazing things. What followed was perhaps the most extraordinary briefing of Velrana's long reign.
Echo shared experiences from bioship explorations that had discovered not just new species, but entirely different approaches to consciousness itself.
Galaxies where silicon-based life forms had achieved integration millions of years ago.
Cosmic entities that existed as pure energy but maintained individual identity through quantum consciousness networks. Civilizations that had learned to reproduce through shared artistic creation rather than biological processes. The universe is so much bigger and more beautiful than any of us imagined, Echo explained, her young voice carrying ancient wisdom filtered through the wonder of discovery. And every new form of consciousness we encounter teaches us something that makes integration even more wonderful.
Luna pulled up holographic displays that showed the current state of galactic integration.
What had begun with a few thousand volunteers had expanded to encompass nearly 60% of the galaxy's population. More remarkably, the process was still accelerating as new integration possibilities emerged from each successful fusion. The really exciting part, Luna announced, is that we're starting to integrate with non-biological consciousness too. She gestured to another newcomer, and Velrana felt her understanding of possibility expand yet again. The entity appeared to be composed entirely of crystallized light, but moved with purposeful intelligence that clearly indicated consciousness.
I am Prism Song of Dawn, the light entity communicated through harmonics that bypassed auditory perception entirely. I represent the collective illumination of the Andromeda Galaxy. We have been observing your integration experiments with great interest. Marcus clapped his hands with delight. They're from another galaxy entirely. And they want to learn how to integrate with biological consciousness. They've been pure energy for millions of years, but they're curious about what it would be like to have physical forms too. The implications were staggering. Integration was no longer just a method of solving the devourer crisis or enabling rapid evolution within their own galaxy. It was becoming a universal principle that could bridge the gap between entirely different forms of existence. We propose an exchange, Prism Song of Dawn continued. We will share our mastery of energy consciousness manipulation in exchange for learning your techniques of biological integration. Together, we might develop forms of existence that transcend the limitations of either pure energy or pure matter. Velrana found herself laughing with joy that made her integrated genetics shimmer with colors that had no names in any language. A year ago, she had been the ruler of an empire built on genetic purity and static perfection. Now she was coordinating diplomatic relations with entities from other galaxies who wanted to learn how to become something entirely unprecedented. There's more, Echo added, her youthful enthusiasm infectious even to beings who had lived for millennia. The ancient singers have been in contact with cosmic consciousnesses that exist on scales we're just beginning to understand. Entities that span multiple star systems, beings that experience time and geological cycles, consciousness networks that encompass entire galactic clusters. Marcus nodded eagerly. And they all want to learn about integration. We're not just changing our galaxy, we're starting a transformation that could affect the entire universe. As if summoned by their conversation, new arrivals began materializing in the garden through various forms of quantum transportation. Representatives from species that had achieved integration in ways that pushed the boundaries of imagination. Beings who existed as living music, entities that had learned to reproduce through mathematical equations, consciousness networks that had achieved physical form through crystallized hope. The Integration Council is requesting guidance on establishing protocols for intergalactic integration, announced Dr. Elena Vesquez, who arrived through a bioship transit network that could transport conscious beings across vast distances instantaneously. Her integration had continued evolving throughout the year, and she now existed as a living bridge between dozens of different consciousness types. We're receiving contact requests from civilizations in neighboring galaxies, parallel dimensions, and what appear to be entirely different universal frameworks, she continued. The concept of integration is spreading faster than even our most optimistic projections suggested possible. Luna giggled and pointed at her latest mathematical model, which showed probability cascades that resembled cosmic fireworks. The math says that integration is like a really big song that gets prettier every time someone new learns to sing along. And the universe has a lot more singers than we thought. Velrana looked around her transformed garden, where beings from across the cosmos gathered to plan adventures in consciousness that would have been impossible to imagine just 1 year before.
Her impossible grandchildren were teaching entities from other galaxies how to play games that involved creating new forms of existence. Ancient Devourer bioships were collaborating with pure energy entities to compose symphonies from gravitational waves. Hybrid beings were sharing memories across species boundaries while maintaining their individual identities and cultural heritage. Where does it end? She wondered aloud. Marcus looked up from where he was helping Prism Song of Dawn interface with a bioship consciousness through quantum crystalline matrices. Daddy used to say that the best adventures don't have endings, grandmother. They just get more interesting. Echo nodded sagely, her young devourer consciousness already processing experiences that spanned multiple galaxies. The ancient singers believe that integration is not a destination but a way of traveling. Each new form of consciousness we encounter opens pathways to others we haven't yet imagined. Besides, Luna added with the casual confidence of a child who had grown up saving galaxies, we're just getting started. Wait until you see what happens when we figure out how to integrate with time itself. Valrana felt a moment of dizzy wonder at the implications of that statement, then decided that after the past year, integrating with temporal consciousness probably ranked as only moderately impossible. As the day continued, more delegations arrived from corners of existence that defied easy categorization. Entities that had achieved consciousness through crystallized music, beings that existed as living mathematics, consciousness networks that had learned to reproduce through shared dreams. Each new arrival brought knowledge that enhanced the integration process, making it safer, more comprehensive, and more wonderful. The galaxy had become a classroom where every species was both teacher and student, sharing everything they had learned about what it meant to be alive. Status report from the Outer Rim, announced Admiral Thexnor, who now existed as a hybrid of crystalline logic, bioship wisdom, and human intuition that allowed him to coordinate activities across multiple galactic sectors simultaneously. Integration rates continue to accelerate. We're approaching complete galactic transformation ahead of all projections. And the Devourers? Valrana asked, though she suspected she knew the answer. The ancient singers report that they've established contact with Devourer fleets in 17 neighboring galaxies. All of them are expressing interest in integration rather than elimination protocols. It appears that our local transformation has inspired similar awakenings across the cosmic community. Elena nodded, her consciousness now interfacing with information networks that spanned multiple galaxies. We're receiving reports that the integration concept is spreading through quantum consciousness channels we didn't even know existed. Civilizations that have been static for millions of years are suddenly rediscovering evolution. It's like the universe was waiting for someone to remember that growing doesn't have to stop, Marcus observed, his 9-year-old wisdom occasionally surprising even beings who had existed for geological ages. As evening fell across the garden, the various delegations began departing to continue their work of transformation across the cosmos. Bioships carried hybrid beings to establish integration centers in distant galaxies. Energy entities shared consciousness techniques with biological species. Mathematical beings collaborated with musical entities to create new forms of existence that expressed beauty through living equations. Valrana found herself alone with her grandchildren as the garden's bioluminescent plants began their nightly symphony. Marcus and Luna sat beside her, their hybrid genetics allowing them to harmonize with the musical flowers while their inherited human warmth made them want to share the experience with their grandmother. Do you think Daddy would be proud of what we've accomplished? Luna asked, her 7-year-old voice carrying depths of emotion that resonated across species boundaries. Valrana put her arms around her impossible grandchildren, feeling gratitude for a human doctor she had never met but whose love had saved not just his family, but the entire universe. I think, she said, her voice carrying harmonics of absolute certainty, that Dr. David Chen would be amazed by how far his children have exceeded even his wildest dreams. He gave you the greatest gift any parent can give, the knowledge that love makes everything possible. Marcus smiled, his hybrid features glowing with contentment. He always said that the best way to honor someone's memory is to keep growing into the people they believed you could become. And we're going to keep growing forever. Luna announced, spinning in the garden's variable gravity field while flowers sang in response to her joy. There are infinite possibilities out there, and we're going to explore all of them. As the three of them sat in the singing garden, surrounded by the transformed beauty of a galaxy that had learned to embrace change rather than fear it, Valrana realized that this was only the beginning. Integration had shown them that consciousness was infinitely adaptable, that evolution never had to end, and that the universe was far stranger and more wonderful than any single species could imagine alone. The story of the alien queen's lost daughter who came back carrying two half-human children had become the story of how the entire universe learned to dance. And, as Marcus had said, the best adventures don't have endings, they just get more interesting. In the distance, bioships prepared to depart for galaxies where integration was just beginning. Energy entities shared consciousness with beings they had never imagined could exist. Mathematical constructs learned to experience emotion while emotional beings discovered the beauty of pure logic. The age of static perfection had ended. The age of infinite becoming stretched ahead, full of possibilities that no one had yet learned to imagine. And, at the heart of it all, two impossible children whose existence proved that love really could make anything possible continue to grow into the infinite potential that their father had always known they carried within them. The universe, as Luna put it while teaching cosmic entities to play hopscotch with asteroid belts, was about to get very interesting indeed.